recording. Yes. Okay. Welcome, everybody. We're very happy to have Marc van Kreveld to give today's colloquium talk. Marc has been here for a long time. He studied computer science at this department. Shall I really say the year? From 1984 to 1988. At the time, the whole study was just 4 years, followed by a PhD from 1988 to 1992. So there was no need for a master's at those times, I suppose. You could jump directly into a PhD.
No, it was doctoral. I was doctorandus. I was not MSc.
Makes me want to cry, you know. His supervisor was Marc Overmars, and then he went to Montreal in Canada to be a postdoctoral researcher at the McGill University. He came back to become first an assistant, then an associate, and a full professor at this department. His research concerns geometric algorithms, provably efficient ways to solve problems whose data has coordinates. And he's interested in applications of geometric algorithms in geographic information systems, GPS track analysis, and graph visualization. He's also interested in puzzle games, both as a hobby and as a research topic. And other hobbies include traveling, which is kind of interrupted because of COVID, badminton, interrupted because of COVID, and bridge, the card game, also interrupted because of COVID. And hiking, I think that's the only hobby that you can, at these times, continue. He's married and has 2 kids who both finished their master's degree already, so quite advanced in their studies. Okay, Marc, the floor is yours. I'll just mute myself and the camera.
All right, thank you, Albert. Yeah, let me share my screen, which I do from Teams, of course. Wait, here. All right, does that work? Albert, unmute and say that this is all fine. Right, so I needed something to talk about. And well, there's of course a couple of options, but there's a number of topics that I prefer to leave to the PhD students with whom I work. Most of my research is actually done together with PhD students, but I think they should talk about it themselves. I thought maybe I should talk about something that's a bit more fun, because the times are actually bleak enough as they are, given the COVID situation. So this is a fun paper that I wrote together with some colleagues. It was recently accepted at a conference to be held this December. It won the Best Paper Award, and it gives a little bit the flavor of research that I do, even though this does not explicitly have that many coordinates. So it might not be very typical. So I won't only talk about the research itself, like a research presentation. I will also tell a little bit the story of the research and basically how it grew out of interactions with people and also with our teaching. Yeah. So it started basically 5 years ago. I was at the ICALP conference in Kyoto, and there was an invited talk by Ryue Uehara. And the fun fact is that Ryue will do his sabbatical here in Utrecht, if all goes well, 1 or 2 years from now, and hopefully we don't have COVID by then anymore. But Ryue is also very interested in puzzles and the analysis of puzzles in terms of complexity. On the left, you see the so-called 15 puzzle, which is a sliding block puzzle, probably very well known. And to the right, you see another sliding block puzzle called Rush Hour, where you have to slide these cars on the grid and get the red car out of the grid by moving it all the way to the right. Very popular puzzles. Well, during this talk, I started thinking about what would be an interesting extension, and there was this Japanese colleague of mine called Yushi Uno. I knew him already from an earlier conference, and we started talking about possible variations. So I wanted a sliding block puzzle that also had rotation, and I didn't like these numbers on the 15 puzzle. I just wanted something with colors. And now the cars of Rush Hour have colors, but these colors have no meaning. So I wanted a sliding block puzzle with rotation where the colors have some significance. So the very first idea would be to look at a small grid like you see here. And since blocks that cover just one grid tile, yeah, rotation doesn't do anything. You need pieces of length at least 2 to make rotation make sense. And now suppose I want to move this red piece to the lower side, like horizontal, like the blue piece is lying right now. Then I could move it in a sliding block puzzle and get it down, right? Well, now I could, if I have rotation, I could take this middle top piece and move its top part to the right and its bottom part up, and it would be in this configuration. Now I could move the bottom piece. No, I can move the red piece, for instance, like this, and then it would be like that. And then I can move the bottom piece to the right. And playing around with this for a while, I realized that I could not get the red piece all the way down. It just did not work. And I was wondering, I could not get to this situation. How can that be? Well, after playing a bit, I realized I could put the red piece only in these 3 configurations and nothing else. I could not get it away. If those blue pieces were there, of course. And the reason I realized had to do with a parity argument. There's a simple proof, and you may have seen a similar proof of this type in recreational mathematics. Imagine that this grid of 9 squares is colored like a checkerboard pattern, like here. So we see here 4 gray squares and 5 white squares. Now, every one of those pieces, which have the shape of a gourd, you may have guessed the title of the presentation from the shape of the pieces. Each gourd will lie on 1 white and 1 gray square, right? Because gray and white squares are the only things that are adjacent. Which means that the 4 gourds lie in such a way that there will always be a white square empty, right? There's always 1 empty square in this puzzle, and it must be white because every one of the 4 pieces covers a gray and a white space. Which means that if I start moving, I cannot get the empty square ever to be the gray square, any gray square, which means that the red piece cannot let go of the 1 gray square it is covering in the beginning. It cannot let go of it. So this is a simple proof why I cannot reconfigure any way I would like. And this is not very nice for a sliding block puzzle. So this design did not work so well. I thought this had to do with the squareness of the grid. So I thought maybe I should consider a hexagonal grid. On a hexagonal grid, you have a bit more freedom of moving pieces around, but you can still have pieces like gourds lying on 2 adjacent hexagons. Right. So this was the first gourds puzzle design. I thought of these pieces that you see to the right. Some have 2 colors, some have just 1 color. And if they have 2 colors, they're different on the 2 sides. And on the left, you see the assignment. I want every red hexagon to be covered by a red end of a gourd. And the solution then would look like this. Okay, and here you see an actual 3D printed copy of this puzzle, because I realized at some point that Tom van der Zanden, that he had a 3D printer and he could print me one of these puzzles. Tom van der Zanden back then was a PhD student of Hans Botlander, and he printed this puzzle for me. This is printed by him. So figuring out the exact geometry that the rotation works so that pieces don't bump into each other is interesting too. But this was the first one. And here you see it in a solved state, where the red ones are nicely together in the top left, the blue on the top right, and the green at the bottom. Right, so this is the assignment, and here you see it superimposed. Okay, so how does this puzzle work? Well, I made a little movie so you can actually see what's going on. You can just pivot pieces like that, rotate on one end, and you can slide pieces. And you slide pieces around the corner, slide them straight, slide straight, pivot on an end, pivot on an end, slide around the corner, yes, and so on. And I'm now trying to get the red piece more to the right, the fully red piece, and I can do that slowly, and then I can stop. I was just wondering, can I move a piece over some distance? Well, this is the sliding block puzzle. It's lying actually on my desk right in front of me here, so I could even show it with the camera if I stop screen sharing, but I won't do that. Right. The question then which I had then is, what if I just toss the pieces randomly on my board? Can I then always solve the puzzle, right? So I start with a random configuration. Can I use these different moves, this pivot around an end, the sliding around the corner and sliding straight? Can I use these 3 moves to always get to the target configuration? That was my question. Okay, that started some research, and then I thought maybe this is a good master project, and especially when Joep Hamersma came by. Joep was a computing science master student. He had a bachelor in mathematics, and he was really interested in puzzles and recreational mathematics. So I offered him this project. Can you do something with it? Can you prove for me that you can always solve such a puzzle? And I thought, well, Tom van der Zanden should become the second supervisor. That just makes sense. And I wasn't interested just in this board, but in also more irregular boards like these. I wanted to have a full characterization of which boards always allow any reconfiguration and which boards don't. Okay? Right. So Joep did a good job, and he actually proved what I wanted to know. He basically showed the following theorem, which is a complete characterization of boards where you can always go from any placement of the Gourds to any other placement of the Gourds. And this is true for boards that are hole free, so there's no gap in the middle like you see here. And let me put on my laser pointer. Here you see a hole in the board, right? If I don't allow holes in the board, then you can always reconfigure if and only if the board has a 2-connected dual graph, and I will explain that in a minute, and the board is not that one exceptional board that you see on the right. Okay, let's look at it again. So we now know that for the top 3 boards, we can get from any configuration of the Gourds to any other configuration of the boards. This bottom board and this one, they are not 2 connected. That means that there is one hexagon, and if I remove that hexagon, then the board falls apart in 2 pieces. Here's the hexagon that makes the board fall apart in 2 pieces for this board. Okay? If that is the case, then you cannot get any reconfiguration. So 2 connected means there is no such hexagon that disconnects the board if you remove it. Okay, so if you don't have such an hexagon, like in the top, you can always reconfigure from any position to any position, except for this board. It's the single exception. That was what you proved, and that's a very nice result. So his proof was constructive. So actually, he showed how to go from one configuration to another one. It was a 10-page proof with multiple lemmas. It used Hamiltonian cycles, it used divide and conquer, and some case analysis. And the proof, because it was constructive, you could analyze how many moves were actually needed to reconfigure one placement of the Gourds to another one. Okay, and this is cubic in the number of Gourds. Okay, well, it's not so hard to see that cubic might be too much. There are boards that need a quadratic number of moves. And for people who have some geometric intuition or puzzle intuition, this simple example at the bottom, when the red Gourds have to go to the left and cover the red hexagons, and the blue Gourds have to go to the right and cover the blue hexagons, this board can fairly easily be seen to require quadratically many moves. You cannot do it with less ever. So this is a lower bound on how many moves you sometimes need. So as an algorithms researcher, we are not happy if upper and lower bounds don't match, because we don't have the full information yet on how efficiently you can do something. So it was a very nice result, but we were not happy yet. So Joep's thesis was written in 2018, and in 2020, I went to Osaka and I visited Yushi Uno in Osaka, so my colleague with whom I was speaking before and did research before. And when I was there, we proved together that a quadratic number of moves is actually always enough. Okay, we reused parts of Joep's proof, but we changed the divide and conquer into a balanced version, and we changed the cases, we simplified, We did a number of things. On top of that, we had some idea that a very related problem, namely, given a board with an assignment, so the colors, but now the gourds are not yet on the board, I want to place them to satisfy the colors. Okay, so the first green-red gourd has to go somewhere, maybe here, maybe here, maybe here, or maybe here, or maybe here. But now I have to place them. Okay, so they're not on the board yet, and I don't know if there is a solution. Then the decision problem of can I do this is NP complete. So there's no polynomial time algorithm known for this problem. Okay, we had ideas for this proof. It wasn't done yet, so I came back to the Netherlands, and in March I arranged a meeting with Tom van der Zanden again, and he is pretty good in these NP hardness proofs, NP completeness proofs, so I thought maybe he can help me finish the proof. And he found out that the proof that Yushi and I had, or the ideas, they did not work, they were wrong, but he found another proof, and a quite elegant one. So that proof is quite nice because it is even a difficult problem for very easy boards, like a board that is 4 hexagons high and very irregular. The shape of the board does not matter for the complexity, but you need many colors to make this NP hardness construction. All right, I will not explain any NP hardness construction, that's not so much fun. Right, so then there was the deadline of the suitable conference. So Yushi and Tom and I started to write the paper. Joep had left academia a while ago. He was a master's student, so he went somewhere else. And we wanted to submit, but of course Joep had to be a co-author. But you cannot just submit a paper without asking a co-author if he's happy with this. And I also could not leave him out because he did a substantial part of the research. So I needed to find him. Well, how do you find a colleague? Well, you use LinkedIn. But then I sent him a LinkedIn message, but he did not respond. So I thought, okay, the deadline is getting close. How do I contact Joep and know if he wants to be a co-author and if he's okay with submitting this paper? So I made a Facebook account. I never had a Facebook account before in my life, so I made it especially to reach Joep. And luckily, I found Joep and I managed to get his email address. And then he wrote me back that he was perfectly fine with being included on the paper, and that he understood that it would not be fair to exclude him, but also not, according to the code of conduct, to exclude him. So he was happy. Right, now I promised I would not give an extensive proof in this presentation, and I won't, but I want to show a few high-level ideas in the proof. Since it's a colorful proof, maybe you like it because you get to look at colors and things. Okay, so the proof that you can always reconfigure is basically saying if I have one placement of the gourds, like in placement A, and I have any other placement B of the gourds, which is the solved state, let's say, then I can always convert A into B using quadratically many moves. Okay, and these proofs often go via a canonical state, some in-between state that both placement A can reach and placement B can reach. Okay, and then since all these moves are reversible, saying that placement B can reach the canonical state is the same as saying from the canonical state I can reach placement B. Hence the 2 arrows. Okay, and this is where the Hamiltonian cycle comes in. A Hamiltonian cycle is a path through all the hexagons where every one of them is encountered exactly once. Now, for the boards that we are interested in, the ones that are too connected and are not that one exception, such a Hamiltonian cycle exists always. And this was proved in a paper some 14 years ago by Polishchuk, Arkin, and Mitchell. Okay, so we use this Hamiltonian cycle that you see drawn in purple here. And the first step is basically aligning all the gourds with this Hamiltonian cycle, which means that they lie along the purple edges. So I do not have any gourds lying and making a cross-cut from one end of the cycle to another. So jumping over something, okay? They're all following the cycle. That is the first step. But they're not in the same order. If I do this from placement A and I also do it from placement B, then the orders are different. So the next step of the proof is trying to exchange pieces on the cycle. They are so that I can go from sorting to another sorted order. And how do I do that? Well, one of the components is that we need to be able to move these gourds along the cycle. And this looks in an animation roughly like this. I can move one gourd along the cycle and move the empty spot as well. And I can basically move all these pieces and cycle through the cycle with my gourds. Now, what turns out to be the case is when I do this, if I move one piece, one gourd, over k positions, this is going to cost me proportional to k times n moves. Okay, I can do it, but it's expensive. Now, what we also found is that if we ever have these 5 hexagons close together and the Hamiltonian cycle visits those 5 nicely behind each other, then this gives me space that when any 2 gourds lie here and the empty space, I can swap those 2 gourds in their order. I can exchange their order along the cycle. Now, exchanging the order of 2 adjacent elements is basically exactly what bubble sort does to sort an array, something we know from Algorithms and Data Structures 1. Okay, the course Data Structures. So by basically applying bubble sorts and getting the 2 adjacent gourds that I want to swap into this situation, I can reconfigure the order of the cycle and solve the problem in cubically many moves. Now, this is a cubic proof. To get quadratic, we wanted to do something more divide and conquer. Now I'm going really high level because I don't want to spend too long on this, and I'm slowly running out of time. So the divide and conquer that is balanced basically splits the Hamiltonian cycle into 2 different Hamiltonian cycles that both have roughly a proportion of the length. I sort the 2 cycles in the same way recursively, and then I do a merge step by exchanging the gourds from one cycle to the other. How does that very roughly work? Well, if I have that one gourd lying somewhere in the blue cycle, I can cycle through the blue cycle until that gourd lies on the shared position, and now it's in the red cycle. So now I have moved it from one cycle to the other, and now next I cycle through and get one of the gourds into the shared position to get it into the blue cycle. And this way you can exchange gourds among the cycles. And this is the basis of this divide and conquer algorithm. Now, this is a balanced divide and conquer, so the total number of moves is characterized by a mathematical expression, which our first-year bachelor students in computer science learn when they're taught in the algorithms course by Gerard Tel, that the problem is solved with a number of moves that is twice solving the half problem plus some overhead for the merge that is quadratic. And this solves to quadratically many moves, and that solves the problem. Now, I did not tell you how to get all the gourds on the Hamiltonian cycle. Omitted proof. Proof that the balanced split always exists. I cannot go into that either. But that led to this theorem that you can always solve the problem, the reconfiguration problem, with quadratically many moves, except for those 2 boards. Now, the story of the paper continues. We submitted this paper to the conference, and maybe you know that you sometimes get interesting things back from the reviewers of the paper. So the reviews from ISAC were sometimes interesting. The most funny thing I found was the middle quote. We started the paper a little bit in a bad way, apparently. And this reviewer said, the first paragraph isn't good, and the opening sentence is one of those rare opening sentences that is worse than, it was a dark, stormy night. Okay, he was right, or she. The reviewer was right, and we changed to the opening of this paper. Another reviewer said that we should consider marketing the puzzle. Well, I'm not much of a marketer, so I'm not really considering that. But I was thinking of other options. And let me get closer to alternatives. I was having the idea of doing something like a puzzle on a smartphone or on any mobile device, where you send your friends a photograph, but they don't really get to see it because it's partially obstructed. And then they have to unlock the photo by solving the puzzle. So this would be the puzzle they get. And to see the picture, they would have to move the gourds on the picture to get them into the solved state like this. And then the puzzle would disappear and you get to see the picture. That sounds like a cool app to me, to have that. Of course, the question then is a puzzle suitable? Can I place a number of hexagons nicely on a picture so that I basically copy the colors of the background roughly into the hexagon? And actually, I now have a master student working on testing how suitable a photo is for such a puzzle. So the photo on the left is probably not so good. The photo on the right doesn't seem so good, too detailed and only two colors. But maybe the photo in the middle with some red hexagons, some purple hexagons, and some beige hexagons would be a nice puzzle. Okay, the questions from the interaction side of things would then be, would users actually like that? If you receive a photo from your friend, you want to look at it, do you really want to solve a puzzle first? I don't know. Okay, we're nearing the end, and my time is also nearly up. I talked about gourds, and basically the shape of the puzzle pieces is based on these bottle gourds that you see on the top. But we could only do boards with an odd number of hexagons this way, because I needed one empty square and all the other one empty hexagon, and all the other hexagons were covered by a gourd covering two pieces. But if I have an even sized board, then maybe I want to take a kettle gourd and place the piece somewhere covering three of the hexagons, and maybe I can then characterize which even side boards can always be solved with kettle and bottle gourds together. Sounds like a fun project, maybe for a next master student. All right, that was it. Thank you for your attention. And gourds are old and well known, 13,000 years old. I liked this quote from Wikipedia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's have a round of applause for our speaker. Really interesting work. Very nice. Let's have hands for questions, and I'll just while you think about your questions, I'll start with a small one. How important is the hexagon structure for this? I mean, there may be, you need the two connectedness for defining a Hamiltonian cycle, right?
Yes.
So how about other structures?
Well, there's not that many regular grids, right? You have the triangular grid, the hexagonal grid, and the square grids. And they're the only space fillings of regular polygons that you can use. I mean, you cannot cover the plane with pentagons. Okay. So there's not that many options.
But there are different tilings, right? I mean, more like not irregular tilings, but we don't want them. Basically.
Well, if you allow rotation, this might be a problem if you have an irregularly shaped tile. But it's definitely conceivable, yes.
Tamara?
Yes, I was wondering, there is an upper bound on the number of steps, but do you have an intuition or indication of how hard it is for a player to solve a certain puzzle?
That's a good question. In a way, if a player knows the constructive proof, the player will have a way of solving it. In practice, it is a little bit like the 15 puzzle, is my experience. You slide the pieces around and it kind of works You have to sometimes move pieces in the wrong directions, which is nice for a puzzle, that it's not just going to a better configuration. How hard it really is, I think comparable to the 15 puzzle, maybe slightly more complex.
I was thinking maybe you can use declarative programming, something like Prolog, to solve these puzzles for you and then report you how difficult it is for different instances of the problem. Is there something like that done, or? Yeah,
I guess if you use Prolog, you would quickly try a backtracking type of algorithm.
Sure.
Difficulty is, in a way, the depth of the search tree of the path that has minimum depth. So then you would do a breadth first search over all possible moves that you can do and find the shortest path, which is in a way the difficulty. Assuming that you know what would be optimal moves. For this type of puzzle, including rush hour, computing the smallest number of moves to solve it is typically NP hard.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much for joining us. That was a really nice and interesting talk, Mark.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for presenting it. And I think next week we will not have a colloquium, and in 2 weeks. Thank you very much. A round of applause.